Hi, my name's Tempe, and I'm at the Courtauld Gallery today looking at a painting by Edgar Degas. It's called Two Dancers on a Stage, and he painted this in 1874 in Paris, where he lived. It's oil on canvas, and it's about the size of an A3 sheet of paper, maybe slightly smaller. I think when we look at this painting today, we see something that's very charming and very pretty, and it really has a chocolate box appearance to it. But if we lived 140 years ago when this was painted, we would have seen something very different. It hasn't changed in its appearance, but our perceptions have changed, and we would have been surprised or even shocked by what it looks like. Now, I'm going to explore that through looking at various things to do with this painting. But first of all, I'm going to start off with talking about dancers and the ballet at this time. Half of all of Degas' paintings are of ballet dancers. He was really fascinated by their movement and by their bodies. And I think also there was something about the fact that he could spend a lot of time watching them in rehearsal. It was sort of an opportunity to study the body in a way that he just couldn't in many other situations. So he spent a lot of time backstage, and he would study not just the dancers when they were dancing, but he would also look at them when they were off duty, when they were stretching or when they were yawning, when they were resting. And this honesty that he captures in his sketches and in other paintings, I think you see here as well. He hasn't posed the dancers in the perfect posture that shows off their bodies in the best way. He has a vantage point that looks down at them from maybe a box on the edge of a stage, and the back dancer on the right hand side, it seems like she's sort of crumpled downwards, and her back leg seems to be tiny in comparison with her front leg, and so there's sort of extreme foreshortening going on. Ballet as an entertainment was something that had grown in popularity in the previous few decades, and it was very, very popular at this time. In fact, an architect, Garnier, was creating building a new opera house at this time to contain the larger audiences that the opera and ballet were attracting. And who were these audiences? Well, they're probably the same kind of audience as who would have seen this painting. It would have been the bourgeoisie, the middle class of Paris, who had gained wealth through investment in factories and things like that, and had a lot of time on their hands for leisure pursuits, such as going to the races or going out for evening entertainment. However, the dancers that we see on the stage here would not have been from that class at all. In fact, they would have been the daughters of laundresses and prostitutes, who Degas also was very interested in painting and capturing through his images. And so these young girls would have come to the ballet maybe in their early teens or possibly even younger. And they didn't come for a cultural education, they came to earn a living and to contribute to their families' wages. And they were called the opera rats. I mean, I think that really reflects the kind of standing that they had even within the opera house. They were not regarded as being particularly special people. Now, this performance that we see going on, we can see that it is a performance by the lighting that's coming on from below the stage, and the fact that the girls are also wearing their performance outfits. They're dressed up so that the audience can admire them. But Degas also gives us this interesting vantage point. I said before that we're sitting in a box, maybe just on the edge of the stage, but we can see a little bit behind one of the scenery flaps that's coming out. And on the left-hand side, we can even see another dancer who seems to be resting, perhaps. Maybe she's supposed to be off stage, but we happen to be able to see her because of our position. And he puts her sort of cut off. This is not a canvas that has been trimmed down. This is how Degas intended us to see her. And on the other side of the painting, on the right-hand side of the painting, we see the dancer with the green sash with her arm just cut off on the edge. Now, these costumes that they're wearing tell us that perhaps this is a scene from the Ballet des Roses, or the Ballet of the Roses, from the opera Don Giovanni, which had been performed in 1866, so 8 years before this painting was painted. And that just demonstrates that Degas didn't paint ever, really, immediately from what he was looking at. He would make lots and lots of sketches, and he had a very academic training, which you mightn't expect and isn't that common amongst the Impressionists, which meant that I think his sort of process was a lot more lengthy than a lot of the other artists in that group. So he would do his sketches and then produce his paintings in his studio. The composition of this painting is something that probably was one of the more surprising features when it was made. Degas goes against the Western tradition of putting the subject matter in the middle of the painting and shifts it up into the top right-hand corner where we have these two dancers. This leaves him a big L-shaped space of the empty stage where you see these two rails for the scenery to be dragged across. And he's perfectly fine with that, and that is a compositional feature. Now, this doesn't come out of nowhere. Degas was really fascinated by Japanese art, and this kind of thing, when you have empty spaces, the subject matter not being very clear, maybe having people cut off on the edge, like the dancer on the left and the dancer on the right's hand, and these are things that you see in Japanese art, and particularly in Japanese prints. Degas had a Japanese print above his bed by Tori Kiyonaga, the interior of a bathhouse, which shares some of these features. And I'd like to mention also the empty floor there. Now, it wasn't just Japanese art that influenced Degas. He was also fascinated by photography, and right from the early stages of his practice, he studied photographs of Western art in order to help him develop his technique. But he was also interested in contemporary photographers, and Nadar, who was a very famous photographer, the first photographer to take aerial photos, he was the person who hosted the first Impressionist exhibition in his own studio. And Degas was instrumental in the organisation of that exhibition, so he must have known him. Well, the Impressionists as a group were, generally speaking, quite friendly with each other, but Degas always seems to be quite aloof and almost quite critical of the Impressionists. He never wanted to be called an Impressionist himself. He was a little bit older, and he even sees, it seems, Manet as a rival. Certainly he's very critical of him in his letters. But one of the features that he shares with the Impressionists is the way that he paints, and he paints with this looseness of his brushstrokes, so that even though he has this more traditional method of linear draftsmanship that means that his composition is very, very clear and tight, he still has this loose brushwork, for example, in the scenery behind the two girls. Now, one thing I really want to mention as well is the physiognomy of the girls' faces. Physiognomy and biological determinism was a really fashionable scientific belief system at this time. People believed that you could tell whether someone was a criminal or not based on the layout of their face. Fortunately, we don't believe this anymore. But at the time, having a small forehead, a snub nose, and a prominent jaw were things that were associated with criminals. And sure enough, Degas puts these on these ballet dancers' faces. So this reminds us that he is creating a painting, not a chocolate box, but this is a painting of artifice. These ballet dancers are not just what they appear to be.